Okay, so in this very short video, we're going to be talking to you about an online treasure hunt that we designed at Warwick, a bit about where the idea came from, how we designed it, the technology we chose, how we tested it, how we used it, and what we've learnt and what we will do with it next. So this came out of work we were doing with the English department at Warwick, and a new programme that they ran this year called Academic Enrichment. This replaced an earlier academic writing support programme and broadened it out to include things like digital literacy and personal reflection. The library ran a session on research styles, research approaches in term 2, which was really well received, and we were invited to then follow it up with an optional extra session in term 3 as part of an enrichment week. And the tutor suggested that we might want to think about types of resources that are difficult for students to find. So we came up with some examples from her area of literature, which very handily is Gothic literature. So some nice kind of interesting examples we could use. And we looked for journal articles that didn't come up on Google or don't come up on library search, trickier to find book chapters. Thought about maybe what happens if you half remember a book and you just remember a few words from the title, or you can kind of remember what it looked like, and also set them the challenge of finding an 18th century primary source. So we had the content then of the treasure hunt, the things we wanted them to find, and then we had to think about how to deliver it. And I had an idea that we might just give them kind of, a Word document in a Teams call and get them to work through it like a kind of National Trust style treasure hunt. Luckily, I had colleagues with more technical expertise who came up with a more exciting way we might get them to do the challenge.
So like Kate said, we ended up deciding on Microsoft OneNote for this rather than PowerPoint on Microsoft. And the reasons for this were we had a few considerations out of what we wanted out of this format and for students to do. So we wanted the students to work together and share their ideas and learn from each other rather than kind of being led or shown what to do by us. We also wanted to try and ensure that when the students were working through the questions, they couldn't necessarily skip ahead or try and do each question individually rather than as a group. As we wanted to try and make sure that things were a little bit kind of more difficult for them to do that. And we also wanted something where we didn't have to make multiple versions of the tasks, or we could put everyone in the same place but couldn't accidentally be edited by everyone. So we eventually decided on OneNote because it ticked all of these boxes. We could put students in breakout rooms, but we didn't need to create multiple versions, and you could use passwords to lock different sections. So it would encourage students to work together and focus on one question at a time. When we created the OneNote, we used a guide created by someone called Rachel O'Brien, a senior digital learning designer at Durham, which was really useful, walks through kind of all of the considerations and practicalities of using OneNote and using it to create like an online escape room or treasure hunt. It was actually really easy to set up. We found that it was generally better to download the desktop app and create our treasure hunt in that rather than using the browser version, and this was mainly because of the password sides of things, because you can only do that in the desktop app. Some really useful features of OneNote is that you can collaboratively edit the document, so we could all go in and add text and images at the same time. And you can create separate links to share with colleagues to edit, and another separate link to share with students to view it and to go through it so they can't accidentally edit it and change what you've made. Another good feature of using OneNote is that it's kind of locked down on an individual level. So when a student is viewing the notebook and unlocks a page using a password, it only unlocks for them rather than for all of the students. So that makes it really good to use in breakout rooms. I won't get into much detail about the setup because there's lots of really useful guides out there. But some tips we found with using kind of OneNote and the passwords is we'd recommend setting them up at the end. So then you don't have to enter them every time you log in and want to edit a page, and also keep a separate document of passwords as well. Because even if you are the admin, even if you created the page, you'll find that you need to re-enter the password to get rid of it, which isn't very helpful if you've forgotten everything. But yeah, other than that, using OneNote ended up being a really good platform for this treasure hunt.
We were really lucky to have a student intern test the treasure hunt for us, note how she found each clue and how long each one took. This is really valuable because we were sometimes surprised by the route she took to find the clues. So She actually found 4 out of the 5 on Google. One of them took her 13 minutes, and it involved changing settings like the language on her browser. So it's really useful to know this in advance. Another clue showed a book cover with the title and author blurred out, and she actually managed to find this by reverse image searching it in Google. So in response, Catriona managed to change the image so it went from this left-hand image to the one on the right, where we really just had the colours and the shapes. And we also added tips to each clue to help steer students away from Google and towards the library databases and library catalogue. We ran the hour-long session in Teams in May 2021, and unfortunately the department realised they'd picked not the best week really for students. They did have other commitments, so sign-ups were low across the board. Unfortunately, we were offered to reschedule for next year, but we thought actually it would be useful to do it as a pilot with just a few students. So that's what we did. It meant we didn't have the competitive element of student groups racing to complete the challenge first. So we didn't have enough students really to do multiple groups. So what we did instead, we put them all into one breakout room after a bit of an introduction from us to the session. The students did work on one clue at a time, as we hoped. It became clear from the feedback that they actually worked individually on each clue until one of them had found the answer, rather than working together discussing as we'd hoped they would. Having only one group worked quite well for a pilot because they actually posted their answers into the main chat, which meant we were able to get a sense of how long it was taking them to do each clue, and Kate could post some encouraging messages in the chat as well. The session timings worked fine for one group. The students completed the challenge and had enough time to come back and discuss the routes that they took afterwards and search tips for each type of material. And we did, though, think that if we had more groups, we would probably need longer.
So looking back on it, the technology worked well, the concept worked as well. We think Teams was a good platform. It's just making sure that students are willing to engage with one another on the breakout rooms and that they understand the expectations that they are working together as a group to solve the same clue as a group rather than as individuals. And I think just making that really clear next time. One thing that was very interesting was they still didn't follow the routes we thought they would. So we had, as Rhiannon said, made sure that they couldn't use Google for everything. But for example, one student said she went straight into the ProQuest platform and searched there for the books and journals. And it was just luck that it happened, that she could find the material that we had set on ProQuest. But there's no reason why that would necessarily have been the case. It's just one publisher platform. So it was just as much as anything, it was really interesting to find out how students go about things and find out that actually they do things in ways that we really hadn't expected. And it gave us the chance to say, you know, that worked here, but another time it may not. And here is a better overall platform to use in the future. So I think in terms of next steps, we want to make sure that the students work together properly. So I guess it's about setting out expectations before we send them off into their breakout rooms about how they're going to go about it. We need to allow a bit longer, I think, next time. As Rhiannon said, the timing did just about work this time, but that was with one group. So I think to allow multiple groups to feedback and to have proper discussion about how people found things, we probably would need to move to a longer, maybe hour and a half, 2 hour session rather than the 1 hour that we had. And I think crucially, we need to make sure that we run it as part of one of our embedded compulsory sessions rather than an optional extra kind of at the end of the year, if we want to make sure that, you know, maximum number of students can get involved and learn from it. So that's it. If you have any questions, please do ask us at the end of the session and we'll be really happy to help.